Hello, my name is Jessica Contreras-Stratman, and I am a student in the Masters of Education program at National University, and I am going to share with you my artifact analysis presentation for the course MAE 670 with Professor Stanzione. So the first slide I have here is my plan of study curriculum mapping and artifact analysis annotated table. What this contains is a key or a legend at the top describing each of the program learning outcomes, PLO 1 through PLO 4, and the table below shows you each artifact that I chose for each course throughout the program and which PLO it aligned with, as well as using one of the indicators to show you which level of mastery I assigned it. So I will kind of briefly go over this, and then in more detail we'll explain each of these artifacts. So the first artifact was in MAE 610. It was a practitioner research study, which I assigned a developed level of mastery. Then I moved into some social emotional learning focused courses, ITI 670, which I chose the SEL presentation I created as the artifact and assigned it an introduced level of mastery. Then moving into ITI 672, I chose the SEL toolbox presentation and assigned it mastered. ITI 674, this research reflection that I chose, I felt that it addressed two PLOs with a mastery level. And then I moved into some technology classes, EID 600, where I created a Google website and assigned that a developed / mastered level of mastery for PLO 1 and PLO 2. EID 610, I created a course module, which I also assigned a mastered level for PLO 1 and PLO 2. Then I moved into some ECE courses, early childhood education, and designed, a mastered level to my dyscalculia research paper for PLO 3 and PLO 4. ECE 652, I chose a focused observation, which I assigned a developed level of mastery. EDA was focused on higher education administration, and I chose a proposal analysis I created and assigned that a developed level of mastery. Finally, this course, MAE 670, I chose my research review summary table and assigned that a mastered level for PLO 3 and PLO 4. So let's get into each of these. The first one being MAE 610. And my apologies if my video is covering up some of this data, but I will include the links so that you can quickly go through it if you are interested to catch those pieces that were hidden. Basically, this is the PLO, again, that was listed in the table, and each of those will be placed at the top of the slide just as a reminder of which PLO I am assigning to the artifact that I'm describing on this slide. So this was my practitioner research study. It was a 4.5-page study in which I introduced my research question and described my rationale for creating it. I did have to do a literature review. There were 3 peer review articles, and this research study and review really helped me to better understand the question I designed, as well as how to go about actually reviewing literature. I hadn't done this before in this format. It was started as like an annotated bibliography, which I continued to do throughout the rest of my courses, and I chose articles that could support my research to not only create this document, but to also inform my classroom instruction with the results that I found. So it introduced, I assigned this a developed for PLO 3 because it really did introduce the process of developing a question, and I had to carefully consider the formatting because there were variables, independent and dependent variables, and then my X and Y piece, and it was really important that this be designed appropriately. So this is why I chose this alignment. And just to reiterate, it did require me to review peer-reviewed articles, which was something that I learned about in this class, that it's really important that your literature is peer-reviewed. And APA formatting was also something I had been exposed to before, but had not had to go into so much detail with understanding to write my own papers. So there's a picture of the beginning of my research study here, and then a link also above. And you'll find a link to each of my artifacts on each slide that follows. So next, I moved into ITI 670. This was a presentation that really just provided an overview of social emotional learning, and CASEL was the emphasis for focusing on SEL. It provided a lot of information and resources to better understand what social emotional learning was and how it could be implemented. It also, this presentation also included a historical background on SEL, the influence it has on student behavior, and data that supports that, and how it really relates to the occupation I'm in right now as an educator. So I assigned this a introduced PLO because this was the first presentation I made in my program, and when I look back, my skills in this area really improved, both for creating presentations and doing research. So it did improve upon my understanding of SEL and its components. I was able to analyze these components, and gave me a deeper understanding of the competencies in SEL as defined by CASEL, and it set a great foundation for the work I was going to do actually throughout the entire program. So there's a link here and a couple pictures to show you what was included in the presentation. ITI 672, this artifact was another presentation, and it presented tools. The focus was tools that you could actually use in the classroom, both myself and others, because we were able to share these with each other by means of our discussion posts. So this included evidence-based resources for using SEL in the classroom. And I assigned this artifact Mastered for PLO 1 because it really did require a solid understanding of approaches to instruction, and I used a lot of higher level digital skills, I would say, to create this presentation. This was very time consuming, but I loved the formatting. That was one of the big pieces, though, that required a lot of attention to detail. So I had to organize my content into 4 different sections, as you can see there in the table of contents, and the links that were included on each pages, as well as the arrangement of images and content. So this really did fit into category, or into PLO 1, because I felt that there were a lot of digital skills being used here and advanced skills, and the elements of graphic design and APA formatting were embedded into it. So there is a link to this presentation as well. And moving into the last of the SEL emphasized courses, this artifact is my research reflection. It was a 5-page reflection that really required me to look into a reflection a lot more in depth than I ever have before. So it gave me different perspectives to consider, which included backward looking, inward looking, outward looking, and forward looking. And there were each of those sections included in the reflection. So I did assign this a Mastered for PLO 3 and PLO 4 because it required that I develop reflective practices and went beyond simply reflecting on the research, but a more in-depth of seeing how this research process evolved and evaluating my own work and how I engaged with others, including my professor. It was an iterative process throughout this research that I did. So this reflection included all of that and definitely had application to my current occupation and made me think about what I could have done differently in this research also. It helped me to view my work through a different lens and improved my understanding even more so of what was involved in academic research. So here is one snapshot of the reflection and a link to the full version. And this is where I moved into technology, which is one of my favorites. This artifact was a Google website workspace. I used the Google workspace to design this website. So I created it from scratch and had never done this before. So this was really exciting. I had to consider a lot of things, including the content that I was going to put on the website and a consistent user-friendly theme for the website. And so a lot of information was put onto this website, but it is something that I'm going to revisit and develop even more. It contains a course for Algebra 1, the beginning stages. There are some lessons, the course goals, my intended audience, which was 9th and 10th graders, assessments, a collaborative space for students, and my educational technology vision and rationale. So I assigned this artifact a developed/mastered. It was hard to choose between the two for PLO1 and PLO2 because it did require a high level of application of digital skills to create this website. I had to consider the content, as I mentioned, as well as designing good written objectives and user design, whether it was user friendly. There were a lot of things that I had to consider, and user design was actually one of the priorities. So I learned about the ADDIE model as a means of developing something like this. It had 5 phases within this model, and I consistently cycled through those phases, and it required a mastery level of synthesis of content that I learned in previous classes, in my SEL classes, and my MAE 610 with research, and it also encompassed the foundations of instructional design. So this was pretty heavy with many skills from different areas. There's a link to the website. It is still in progress, so there's a couple things that have not been finished, but for the course requirements, it was completed, and feel free to visit if you're interested. The next one is EID 610. This was also a technology course, and I had the option to create either another website or some sort of platform to include a course. I chose to do something a little different in this course because I had already been exposed to creating a website. So I experimented with using a learning management system to present a course, and that learning management system was Canvas. It was a mini unit that addressed problem solving and growth mindset, which are 2 things that I try to incorporate in my classes now. So I thought, here's some actual time that I've carved out for myself to dig into this a little bit more. And this content was broken down into 2 modules, one that I completed and the other one also being a work in progress. So I did assign this a mastered level for PLO1 and PLO2 because it demonstrated a well-rounded understanding and application of the principles of instructional design. I did have a lot of background in the content, but that also had to be sorted through and really developed sequentially to make sense to the user. The student was my audience. And I actually used a backward design process, which I learned more about in this course, and had to include differentiation within the course. It was designed to be an asynchronous course, so that was a little bit more of a challenge because I have had experience with working uh, in a blended kind of a hybrid asynchronous and synchronous course, but this was strictly asynchronous. So it includes also learning objectives, activities, and assessment appropriate to the demographic of students I chose, which was again 9th and 10th graders. I was also able to use skills I had learned in previous courses and incorporated them into this course. There were a lot of digital tools, including Nearpod, Padlet, Google Slides, some Khan Academy, and then it all went into a mini course on Canvas, which was my learning management system. So if you'd like to take a look at it, there's a link here again, and we'll move on to the next slide, which was my first early childhood education course. This was all about inclusion. So we learned about several disabilities and the importance of creating an inclusive environment. And this artifact I chose was a 9-page research paper on dyscalculia, which I previously thought was pronounced as dyscalculia, but it's a little bit different is what it was presented to me, that's the information that was presented to me in this course, that it's pronounced a little bit differently. So anyhow, the paper explores characteristics of this specific disability, the incidence and prevalence of it, the diagnosis, etiology, and implications of intervention and inclusion of children with this disability. So the course was, revolved around early childhood education, but really this is something that can be applied to my job right now as an educator with secondary students, because it is something that kids have throughout their entire life. So depending on when they're diagnosed with it, that's when a teacher would become aware of it. But I had never seen this in any of my IEPs. I did have a student tell me they had dyscalculia, but it was not really understood. They explained it as being dyslexic, but with math. So that gave me an idea, but I really didn't get to learn a lot about it until I wrote this paper. So I assigned it a mastered level for PLO 3 and 4 because it included aspects of research that gave me a more profound understanding, and I learned again some new things. It was a complex neurological difficulty that students have, so this really just increased my awareness and my curiosity because I specifically teach mathematics. So I really enjoyed doing this paper, and it created motivation for me to be more proactive about seeking appropriate diagnosis. Not that I'm a professional in this area, but if there's any suspicion or if my students mention this to me, then I have a little bit more background. So I really enjoyed this activity. And again, there's a link to the study if you're interested. The next course was another early childhood education course, and this again was a report. It was a focused observation, so I was not able to get into a classroom. There were some alternative options for people who didn't actually work currently in a classroom, which was my situation, so I appreciated that. But I did get to watch 3 different interactions with different students and different educators, and I was looking at it through a lens of Piaget and Vygotsky's learning theories, and I also was making connections with the California preschool curriculum framework as I watched it, noting what standards these educators were addressing in their interactions with these students. So I became a lot more familiarized with the California preschool curriculum framework, which is essential in considering future work with this age level, which is something I've thought about. So I did assign this artifact a developed for PLO 4. I really had to understand these theories, which I have been exposed to before, but it's been a while, so I was able to re-engage with those and refamiliarize myself with that understanding. And then making connections with what the educators were doing and the standards laid out in the framework was really interesting to see how those interactions took place. So if I do choose to go into this work later in my career, this is something I have to look back on as a really great experience. There's another link to this observation if you care to look through it. And now we're moving into my second to last course, which was Introduction to Higher Education Administration. I actually didn't completely understand what this course was, and I found that out once I got into the course. I was thinking it was more for administration in like K through 12 secondary, but it turned out that it was that higher education. I just had a misunderstanding of that, so it was more so in the college level of administration. So it was very interesting, and I think that a lot of the things that I learned here can also be applied to just administration in general. But this was an introductory course, so I chose my proposal analysis, which I assigned a developed for PLO 4, and this was a 4.5-page project that was basically I got a choice of proposals to choose from, and the one I chose was for a new community college that would enroll only full-time students planning on a bachelor's degree transfer. So I had to build an analysis that included topics I had learned in the course, and I really felt like this required some divergent thinking, really just kind of out of the box, because there was no real research on this specific idea. I had to kind of blend and amalgamate this data I had from the course with my ideas, my own ideas. So it required a lot of critical thinking and creative analysis. It was challenging in the beginning, but once I got going and you know, got into the ideas that I was bringing together, it got a little easier throughout. So some of the components that I included in this paper were on the history of higher education, the history of institutions in higher education, students, faculty, finance, curriculum, and outcomes. And again, it required a lot of critical thinking and independent thinking, so I assigned it a developed for PLO 4. There's a link again if you are interested, and the image here includes the beginning of my paper, hopefully to spark a little bit of interest, but I know we're all limited on time. So my final artifact is for MAE 670, and I chose my literature review summarization table. I assigned this a master for PLO 3 and PLO 4, and basically this table was taking the information that I had already gathered but was in a lot more detail in my literature review paper, and I had to basically refine that, summarize it, and put it into the table in those 7 categories that you see. So let's see, I assigned it a mastered for PLO 3 and 4 because it was an extension of a critical review of study that I used for my research proposal, and the activity was designed to promote synthesis of information that supported my practitioner research question, and it was something I hadn't seen before, but was really helpful in not only teaching me how to take the important information that was needed, but also for the reader, because instead of reading, a full page or more on the literature review, it kind of breaks it down into the important pieces. So I really do think this artifact showed the culmination of the application of the practitioner research methods that were introduced in my first class in the program. So that was what I chose, and there is a link to the actual proposal, and this table was taken from page 5. I condensed, squeezed it a little bit so it would fit on this page. It's wider in the paper, but that is it. So this is the end of my presentation. That was a little long, but thank you for listening, and take care.